It is now about 100 years that the theory of relativity and the quantum physics, quantum mechanics, brought a real earthquake into the classic ways of science, especially the physics. But the topic of near-death experiences, it can bring even a bigger earthquake, and not only to the neuroscience. It can change our understanding of our life, because it can open a very big picture above our existence. In a way, it may perhaps become even a challenge for the modern time humanity to integrate the implication of this phenomena. We live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality. You are that reality. When you understand this, you see that you are nothing. And being nothing, you are everything. And that's all. Tibetan Master Kalu Rinpoche. You see, so the near-death experiences are not real in the way they appear to the dying people. Similarly, like this world around us is not real in the way we are perceiving it. And it is not only the Buddhist wisdom and Buddhist insight which is telling that, it is even our science which knows that as well. Giving example, the light and the colors, they don't exist. These are just the electromagnetic waves of a very particular wavelengths, and the electromagnetic waves are colorless or even lightless. It is the interpretation of our eye and especially the brain which gives the appearance of light and colors and shapes and all that. But the Buddhist teachings are also very unequivocal about the other side of this truth, that in the different frequencies of existence, or if you like, in the different frequencies of appearances, the experience of happiness and sorrow is what it is. You know, your toothache, it's good to know it is just appearance. Does it help you? I think I don't need to explain what is meant by near-death experiences, because this topic is now discussed everywhere. You can find it even in the mainstream medias, you will find it in professional literature, in the magazines, even in daily newspapers. Usually there is an attempt to explain it away in some way. But also, to be honest, there is also increasing number of articles popping up representing rather the other side of the discussion. So, in this talk, I would explore the phenomenon of near-death experiences as objectively as I can, assuming a position from where I can cover or even explain all the confronting or conflicting argumentation of the different sides of the discussion. And let's be clear that these involved sides of discussion have sometimes a substantial argumentation for their for their position. Sometimes it is even enhanced by emotions, because it is such a sensitive topic. The mainstream science, for example, will try to explain the whole near-death experiences purely materialistically as a result of the brain chemistry, all these neurotransmitters, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, all that. And certainly they have quite a heavy weighting argumentation. For example, that you don't need to be dying to have this kind of experiences similar to near-death experiences. And it's true, another situation may lead to similar experiences. But actually in the science, the predominant explanation is in this dying brain surge. Kind of a last goodbye of the dying brain, putting out this final spectacular firework of brain chemistry. So that would be the position of mainstream science. But then we have another angle of argumentation, and this comes from the side of psychology, coming with the hypothesis that the near-death experience can be actually kind of recalling or reliving of the trauma of birth. This tunnel and the white light and the spiritual unconditioned love, so many times reported in the near-death experiences, comparing it with the birth channel, the baby coming out to the daylight, being covered by the unconditioned love from the parents. So that would be the argumentation from the psychology side. And then we have, of course, the religious community, seeing in it rather the confirmation of the oldest religious idea, actually, that there is a continuation of existence after the body dies, this kind of afterlife, that only the soul is living the dying body and goes its way to the different destiny. Actually, Buddhism is not really working with the concept of soul, of eternal soul, but it has the idea of eternal rebirth, coming from a lifetime to the other one, and again in different spheres of existence. That's the Buddhist point of view. It is clear that in my explanations I will use predominantly the wisdom and insight coming from the Buddhist teachings, because it opens the biggest picture above all these phenomena of near-death experiences, of afterlife, even of this contemporary existence here and now, explaining so many things. So in this talk, wanting to take this superposition, trying to incorporate all this kind of argumentation into one clear explanation. It is a little bit like the three facets or three sides of this strange object. So the circle would represent, let's say, the psychology view. The square would represent the scientific way of explanation, and the cross would be the religious way of understanding. Like three facets of one object, and our task would be rather to see the whole object in one glance. Not that one of these is correct and the other false. That is not very helpful. The truth is contained in this kind of explanation which covers all the existing ones. Actually, I've done it already. If you have seen the video UFO and Buddhism, in the second half, beside many other things, I was also explaining this juxtaposition of Darwinism and creationism, with this superposition, finding a kind of a position from where these two are fully integrated, not that one is right and the other is completely false. Doesn't work so. The truth is more contained in this kind of embracing all what we know. It is something like searching for common denominator. You may know it from mathematics. If you have, let's say, number 2, 3, 4, it is not 4 because the 3 is not properly contained in that. It is not the 6, 9, no, 12. You have to go up to the 12 because all these 3 are properly contained in that. So for task of this magnitude, I will start with explanation, with a fundamental explanation of the relationship between brain and mind. Because this is the foundation. We have to start with that. So I will explain it with the help of a computer, but I ask you, please be attentive to it, even if it may appear to you somehow primitive or boring or whatever. Stay attentive through this little exercise, because I will refer to it many times even later in this talk. So get it properly. Here it is. So as you can see, I have attached many of the peripheral devices to make the analogy to a living human being as complete as possible. The camera is really connected, and that's the symbol of a human seeing, and it works. Microphone is the hearing, symbol for the hearing ability. Speaker is clear, that's the speaking. The modem connected to internet is the symbol for our social contacts, socializing. Keyboard and the mouse is the symbol for our active, for the active part of our life, when we are doing things, executing things. The mouse symbol for decisions, deciding every day many things. The little light in the back is the symbol for conceptual thinking, sometimes on, sometimes off. And the hard disk, the external hard drive, in this case, worldly data, the worldly information stored in a memory. And now we have the mind. The notebook is the symbol symbolizing the human mind, and the screen, the consciousness. The experience of our life is happening actually on the screen of consciousness, and we see already now experience running. So I think the representation of a living human being is as complete as possible. But now we have here two different switches. One button has the label OBE, which means out-of-body experience, and the other one, the red one, has the label death of the body. So first, let us see what will happen when I press the OBE button. Let's do it. Okay. The notebook is now undocked from the docking station. So the first thing you can see that the experience continues. If we look in detail to the docking station left behind, this is the representation of the human body with the sensory organs and the brain. And now you see that the mind actually is working even when it is undocked. Very important message from that. Now, we can see that the notebook has its own camera, has its own microphones and the speaker and the keyboard and the touchpad and the hard disk with its own memory. And only it is now wireless. It has also antenna, so still connections with other beings is possible. But the communication now is more or less telepathic. It doesn't use normally the slow human language. The contacts with another beings are now much directer, mind to mind. Now, this is the analogy for out-of-body experiences some people are reporting. But what I mean, out-of-body experience is really verified. When the mind of the people really is witnessing something which can be later verified. And really bringing testimony about things happening in another places. So that's a classic out-of-body experience. Now, if we look back in detail on the docking station, symbolizing the human body with the sensory organs and the brain, all the material components of our body, it's still alive. Some lights little are on, but it is in a vegetative state. It is like vegetable. The mind and consciousness has gone. Only the basic function of the body, of the living body, are still directed directly by brain, the heartbeat, the breathing. Now, for the purpose of this demonstration, I dared even to open the docking station to see inside. So that what I am doing now is like neurosurgeon opening the skull in the case of human body. And you see, here is the brain. This is the symbol for a human brain. And you can see there is quite lots of electronics actually involved. These interfaces for the individual peripheral devices. There is also the important outlet from the docking station, which connects actually the notebook directly to the motherboard. When the notebook is docked, the connection with the processor is very direct. All these peripheral devices are actually giving input and data to the bus of the motherboard, which is quite direct to the processor itself. What I am actually showing with this analogy is this very close relationship between brain and mind. When it is docked, so it is very intimately connected with the processor, with the experience. But when it is undocked, it has its own life and goes its own way. Now, the important message to the neurologists, neuroscientists, when they are using EEG, electroencephalograph, or MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, or CAT scan, computed tomography, they are not measuring the activities of the mind, they are measuring the activities of the docking station, of the brain only. I think this is a very important message to the neurology and neuroscience. So let's put all back, and now let us see what will happen when I press the red button. It's a little joke, but as a first thing I was trying to turn the camera of the notebook towards the docking station to symbolize that what many near-death experiences or dying experiences actually are reporting as the first thing, that they are hovering over their body, witnessing frantic activities of the doctors over the dead body, Usually the near-death experience starts like that, but then the mind, the notebook, the mind, goes its own way, usually still having some kind of an etheric body or fine material body, which gradually dissolves anyway. Usually later on it is just the mind and consciousness witnessing some quite dynamic, dramatic events, positive or negative. And if we now look at the docking station, it's completely black. The docking station, the periphery, the brain is now dead. And the experience on the screen of consciousness continues. So this is the message I wanted to show. The relationship between brain and mind. When it is docked, very, very intimate, very direct, but it can undock and it can go its own way. And here is the summary in a graphic form. If you look to the left side, when the notebook is not connected, so the docking station is good for absolutely nothing. Even if the periphery is switched on, everything in perfect condition, you cannot do anything with that. So similarly, the human body and the brain, even when the sensory organs are intact and in perfect condition, the body is alive, but the consciousness and the mind is not connected. It's absolutely good for nothing. It's like vegetable in the garden. Very different with the notebook. When the notebook is connected in the docking station, when it is docked, so it is receiving the data from the peripheral devices. But when it is disconnected, when it is undocked, it is still functioning very well. It has its own battery and hard drive and antenna and display. But it is working in a different mode. So similarly, the mind, the consciousness and the mind, when it is docked or connected with the brain, with the body, so it is receiving the data, the information from the sensory organs and the brain. But when it is disconnected from the body, from the brain, it is still functioning very well, still very alive, but functioning in somehow different mode. We would say it is functioning in different frequency of reality, in the spiritual reality. You see, simple as that. Docking, undocking. As long you have it fresh in your mind. I wanted also to include here at least one authentic near-death experience report. In this particular case, I think it is actually dying experience, because Dr. Anthony Chicoria was hit by a lightning and he died there. Fortunately, he was resuscitated quite quickly. I borrowed this video from Spiritual Masters web, Supreme Masters web. Lots of information there, I can recommend. But it was too long, so I cut it together, taking just the relevant parts, putting it together. Enjoy it.
Where I was standing at the phone, the building got hit by lightning, and I remember hearing this loud crack, and I saw this big flash of light come out of the phone, and it hit me right in the face. And I remember seeing every bit of that, and when it hit me in the face, it just sent me flying backwards like a rag doll. And suddenly, as I was going backwards, suddenly something changed and I was moving forwards, and I remember standing there thinking, this is really strange. I know that I got hit. I know that something bad happened and I went flying backwards, but now I'm not going backwards anymore. I'm just kind of standing here. And I remember looking down at my feet, and I looked at the wall, and the phone is dangling, and I still am mystified as to what had happened. But yet I had complete recall of every millisecond of that time. And right about that moment, my mother-in-law, who was at the top of the stairs, starts screaming, and she starts running right at me. And I felt like a deer in the headlights. I'm looking at her going, oh, what's going on? And she ran right by me. And I turned to see where she was. And I looked over on the ground, and I'm on the ground. And I thought, well, I mean, this is exactly what I thought. I said, I'm dead. And as I was standing there, I'm watching what's happening, and there was somebody waiting to use the phone, and it turns out it was a nurse in the middle of nowhere waiting to use the phone. And so she drops down to the ground to start doing CPR, and my mother-in-law was standing there, and all these other people were there by then. And I'm still standing here, and I'm looking at them. I hear everything they're saying, but they can't hear me, and they can't see me because I'm calling out to them. And at that point, it was interesting, because the first realization that I made was, gee, there's not been a break in conscious thought at all. So whoever I am is not in the body. It's whatever form I'm in, spiritual form, is who I am, because the consciousness is with me, all of my thoughts are with me, all of my memories are with me, and I thought, well, I guess there's no point in hanging around here. The second thing that was very interesting to me was that it was very dispassionate. There was no emotion associated with the fact that I was dead. It was very matter of fact, oh, well, I am. And so I thought, oh, there's no point in staying here, so I turned. And I started to walk up the stairs, and I don't know where I was going, but that just seemed to be what I was going to do. And as I'm looking down at my legs, I see my legs dissolve. And so suddenly I'm not in a solid form anymore. I can see that I'm becoming a floating energy ball of some sort. I float up the stairs, I passed through the wall into the room where all the family is. And I saw my kids and the rest of my family and my wife, and they were all having fun and painting faces, and I thought, they'll be fine. And there was no emotion associated with the fact that I wasn't going to see them again. It was just very matter of fact, they'll be fine, and I'm going someplace else. And I floated out of the building, and when I got out of the building is when things really started to happen. As I got out of the building, all of a sudden I was wrapped in this bluish white light. At first I was like, okay, what is this? And I'm analyzing it as it's happening. And if you could imagine absolute pure love and peace, that's what it felt like being in this light. And that's what this was like, but this was absolute love and peace. And it was like falling into a river of pure positive energy. I knew that where I was going felt pretty good, because I could sense that I was being taken someplace. And I saw the really high points and low points in my life just kind of quickly go by. You know, it's my kids, and, you know, I did this or I did that, but I was really happy about it. And then right about the time that I was so happy that I was going, all of a sudden, bam, I was back in my body. I was angry I remember it hurt. I mean, I went from absolute bliss to feeling, like somebody had gotten punched in the mouth, and I had a burn on my face, and I had a burn on my foot, and there's this poor woman who's doing CPR, and I just wanted to tell her to stop, but I'm still unconscious. I'm in the, I'm stuck back in this body. It's unconscious, but, my consciousness is still very aware of what's going on. And it seemed like several minutes after that she stopped, and I managed to be able to open my eyes, and everything was very fuzzy. And I sat up, and I just wanted to say that I was okay, and I wanted to thank her. Yes. What is me? I think me is spirit, and the spirit lives on. And that we have a memory of all the times we've come into this earth plane. And we cycle through, and we keep going through this process until we've earned a good enough grade that we don't have to keep coming here.
Wonderful story, wonderful report, and so many things contained in the report of Dr. Chicoria. And you can see so clearly this ability of the mind to dock and to undock from the brain, from the body. But let's be clear that in the real life there are also many stages in between, that some of the centers of the brain are connected with the mind directly, but another centers may be shut down or disconnected or even undocked. So there are many stages in between. One example of this partial disconnection between brain and the mind are the dreams in the night, usually starting with a review of the events of the day. Sometimes even older material is presenting itself for kind of a review. Material from the brain storage, I already mentioned, symbolized in our analogy by the external hard drive. These are the memories of events and experiences from this lifetime, all the conceptual thoughts and thinkings and kind of reflections and even feelings in a basic form. When the brain gets damaged, so this kind of a memory may not be easily accessible anymore. Let's say by injury or Alzheimer. So this would be the first storage, brain storage. But then, usually, the sleep and the dream deepens. Some of the rational controlling functions of the brain may be reduced or even suspended completely, so that the material, unresolved material from the second storage may get free access into the mind. In Buddhist teaching, this is called karma. Karmic potentialities, unresolved material. Getting into the perception is the story maker. So the perception will make the kind of stories out of these potentialities, presenting it to the consciousness. And we get nice dreams, bad dreams, confused dreams, even nightmares. It may be helpful at this point to explain how karma is understood in Buddhism. The original meaning of the word karma is action or deed, but karma has in Buddhism much larger meaning. It is the central part of the teaching of conditionality and causality. It has a central position in the teachings of ethics. It is a decisive factor in the process of rebirth. But For the purpose of this presentation, I prefer to present karma in almost a scientific way. The easiest way to understand it, imagine it as a kind of debt. When we act against the nature of things, we create a particular potential of imbalance or disturbance. Karma is the thirsty line, the thirsty track remaining behind our imperfect living. The unfinished business, kind of positive or negative disbalance, disturbance of equilibrium. This debt goes with us in a latent form, waiting for the opportunity to return or discharge its potential back into life, to reinstall the equilibrium. We can understand karma and its result to be a kind of a basic law of nature, comparable a little bit to the second law of thermodynamics, when imbalances seek equilibrium. You can understand it even clearer when you look into the life of fully realized, fully enlightened beings. They live in harmony with the life, in harmony with their personality and with their nature. And even if they do big things, there isn't this kind of thirsty karma remaining behind their lives. Always being even with everything on the spot. They live with wisdom and compassion. They just respond to the events coming to them from outside or inside. But we react. That's the difference. Driven by forces of imperfection, we react with emotions, with liking and disliking, with desire, resistance or delusion. And that's karma. That creates karma. One of the chief producers of karma is the attachment to the idea of self. This ego obsession, me and mine, ego-centeredness, egoistic attitudes. When the particular karma finds the opportunity to discharge its potential back into life, that's called vipaka. It is the time when karma ripens and brings its result. And so we distinguish good karma and bad karma, or better, wholesome karma or unwholesome karma. Both is a kind of that. Both is a kind of disturbance of equilibrium. When karma of wholesome things ripens, we are in happiness. When unwholesome karma brings its result, we are in suffering. Actions are not good or bad because of some divine definition. Actions, but also thoughts, speech, also mental attitudes, motivations, all that. We distinguish wholesome or unwholesome actions because of the result they bring about. Is everything in our life result of karma? Very, very often comes this question. Certainly not. Karmic forces are only dispositions. Many things can happen to us in our life, but only that which will somehow resonate with elements from our karmic pool will really touch us, positively or negatively. Karma also steers the rebirth of beings. This is Buddhism. And then we are born with unfinished karma from previous existences. We consume karma during our life, but by reacting and acting selfishly, we create new karmic forces, good or bad. Buddhism teaches to create good karma, but in the ultimate goal, it aims at ending karma altogether. So even the dreams are a kind of a karma work, when some karmic stored stuff presents itself to the mind for integration, for healing. But further, in our computer analogy, we have even a third gateway of entry in our experience, symbolized on the picture by the Wi-Fi antenna. It is a symbol for input coming to the mind from transcendental or spiritual zones, from all kinds of different frequencies of reality. Now, on the example of dreams, we have seen that the brain is not the producer of experience, neither it is a receiver of experience or consciousness. In a wakeful state, meaning when the mind is docked in the brain or to the brain, in that case the brain is something like a preprocessor or deliverer or supplier of worldly sensory impingements, feelings and conceptual thoughts to the mind, or more precisely to the perception of the mind. The brain in this case floods the perception with worldly data, and the perception makes of it our life story. You know, the perception, the story maker. But by functioning in this way, the brain actually protects from or shields the mind of any transcendental or spiritual input and access. And let's be clear that this kind of protection for 95% of people is a blessing. It is really important because more than half of the spiritual content and influence is highly undesirable, even dangerous. So many people damaged their natural protection by drugs and ended in mental hospitals. Therefore, advanced spiritual practices should be done only after clear and solid preparation and appropriate purification. Else, they may lead to unwanted or even very unwanted results. You see, I put this on the paper because it would be too difficult to formulate it correctly in a concise way. And so here is the summary. We should understand the brain to be rather a shield or a defender or actually a blocker of any spiritual otherworldly input. Everything which goes through the brain into the mind is worldly and mundane by definition. And under normal circumstances, the worldly stuff has priority so that the other influences are blocked or strongly reduced. But when the brain is partially or fully disconnected, the experience of the mind is increasingly shaped by the forces of karma, that would be the second hard drive, which under normal circumstances, of course, the karma has influence even into our everyday life. That what we are perceiving, or better, how we are perceiving this multitude of events happening to us, what we are choosing, what we are focusing on, and how we experience it, that's quite strongly influenced by the past karma. So karma has its influence even in our everyday life, but when the rational functions of the brain are somehow reduced or partially disconnected, even blocked, then these things has free access into the perception, into the mind. For highly spiritual people, this is the blessing, this is the wanted opening. For unprepared, unpurified people, this is the curse, because they will be hunted by the demons and all that stuff of the low spiritual areas. So when the brain is partially or fully disconnected, the experience of the mind is increasingly shaped by the forces of karma and impulses from the spiritual world. And of course, when the body dies, that's exactly is. The rational filter has gone, all these rational limitation or steerings have gone, and now the mind is fully opened for the active karma and for the influences from the spiritual realities, different zones. With this knowledge, you will also better understand the function of different spiritual practices. Some of them use the brain, but majority of the practices are actually designed to attenuate or turn off the conceptual functions of the brain, conceptual rational functions of the brain. For example, the work with koan in Zen Buddhism. That's one example. Saturating or even oversaturating the brain with an apparent nonsense until it gives up and opens the mind towards freedom. You know, this is a classic spiritual path, which is pretty sure that it will open up to the wholesome or wanted areas of spiritual realities. Or the classical concentration meditation using one single non-conceptual meditation object to fill the brain with it completely, and so to stop its coarse conceptual activities, enabling the mind to tune to refine subtle levels of consciousness. Under meditation, the majority of people understands this. But of course there are many different kinds of meditations, and especially Buddhism, this is just a secondary training, focusing and deepening the concentration, but the core of the Buddhist teaching is insight, wisdom, which is not attained by pure concentration of the mind. Another time I will speak about it more. Now, some explanations. The mainstream science heaviest argument for the brain creates mind theory, which is actually an assumption. Brain creates consciousness, brain creates mind, is the evident fact and truth that with the help of chemical substances it is possible to influence, even change, the experience of the mind. Psychoactive drugs used in therapy and psychiatry can change the quality of life. Psychedelic chemical substances quite evidently can trigger enormous, dramatic, even spiritual experiences. Isn't it a rock-solid proof that the experience, even transcendental experience, is created by material brain? You know, rhetoric question. Now comes the rhetoric answer. It is not. We can compare the function of psychoactive drugs with influencing the electronics of the docking station. If we go back to our computer analogy, in the docking station, if we influence the electronic in any subtle way or any targeted way, it will influence the stream of data coming to the notebook, certainly yes. And of course it is a very specific way. We want to increase the colors or make it a little bit more quick or whatever. So similarly, these psychoactive drugs are influencing the work of neurotransmitters and endorphins and dopamine and all that, so that actually the brain works somehow more smoothly, or as we want to work. So in that case, of course, these drugs work and influence the quality of life, but in no way there are proof that the brain is producer of consciousness or the producer of the mind. That's the message here. Yeah, so the psychoactive chemical or biochemical drugs are not influencing the mind directly, but they are influencing the workings of the material brain only. Now, there are some scientific experiments when electromagnetic impulses were sent to the lobe of volunteers using the spiritual helmet, or they call it the God helmet. These people were then reporting almost spiritual experiences of oneness, or even kind of a weak mystical experiences. The mainstream science took this as a proof and evidence that all spiritual experiences are created by brain and they are the product of the brain. The truth is actually exactly the opposite. Sending electric or electromagnetic waves to some brain centers will certainly disturb, jam or hamper the normal brain, very subtle neuronal functions. It will set certain brain areas out of work so that some of the transcendental contents can address the mind. This is my explanation to this very notable and interesting experiments I was tracing already quite some time ago, thinking about how this would be possible. Another example: doctors gave a dose of psilocybin to a volunteer. Psilocybin is the mushroom substance, very strong hallucinogenic drug. And they then put that person into MRI scan, expecting spectacular firework in the brain neuronal activity. But actually the opposite was the result. Some brain centers were rather static or inactive. This is a story I only heard it. I have no confirmation for that story, but it would go exactly in the same line that the drugs actually, especially the psychedelic drugs, are rather blocking or disturbing or switching off some of the normal regular functions of the brain, these protective functions of the brain, so that the transcendental contents may resonate, come into the mind and make its presentation, so to say. Actually, there is a confirmation for this experiment. It was done by Professor David Nutt and his groups, and what he said about this experiment in a video clip. And what we found was completely surprising and exactly the opposite what we predicted, because we found that psilocybin turned off blood flow in the key parts of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, the posterior cortex, and the thalamus. When you look at those parts of the brain, you realize that they are actually the parts of the brain which control and integrate the way in which the brain processes information. They are the kind of gatekeeper regions, the nodes, which regulate what you do and what you feel. And by switching those off, we can kind of liberate the rest of the brain so that it can do other things. And that's why you get the expansion of consciousness. The mind is not created by brain, and these are all indications for that. But what I would consider as a real proof is one case from the collection of Ian Stevenson. It was not collected by him, it happened in Bangalore in India. And it was collected by Dr. Satwan Pariskha, Associated Clinical Professor of National Institute of Mental Health in May 1985. Again, to make the story short, Sumitra was a barefoot married village woman and she died of a seizure. They declared her dead. But after some time she woke up as a completely different woman, as a Shiva, a daughter of a schoolmaster, of a school teacher from another village, which died violently some years before. Now, suddenly she did not recognize anybody from her previous family. She felt very strange to meet her husband, so to say. She started to address him in a very special way. Now, she was quite an intelligent woman with a completely different personality. She could read and write. When the schoolmaster from the other village heard about that, he came to see her. She immediately recognized him. She could actually recognize even the mother. They made a kind of a test visiting the family of the school teacher. There were quite a number of women all over, and they hide the mother into her special room. And Shiva was immediately clear that mother is not here. She would go to the room of the mother. She knew where it was. She could remember 16 accounts of Shiva's life not mentioned in any press reports. She identified 22 relatives of Shiva from photograph, some of them naming directly by name. So for me this is a very strong case showing that the mind is not created by brain. So this was the first part of the talk. And I have to admit that actually the main purpose was to shake up the mainstream neuroscientists and their convictions that the mind and the consciousness is created by material brain. Really inviting them to open up to a bigger perspective on the complexity of the human mentality and human consciousness. It is not that simple as they think. And there are so many things coming from different sides, knocking at their doors, to explain all these anomalies, like out-of-body experiences, like telepathy, near-death experiences, how it would be possible that with sending loving kindness you can influence another people. And it is true, it is even statistically proven. Now, on the other side, I want also to acknowledge the huge development in neuroscience, especially in the 5 last years. Such a big step forward in the research, in the results of the research. Probably also due to new generations of the scanners. Tomography means the slicing of the body by the scanner. Computed tomography is still using actually radiation, X-ray. So there is little concern about irradiations of these organs you are scanning. The MRI, magnetic resonance, is not using X-ray. It is using a very, very strong magnets. Sometimes the contrast still needs to be increased, so there is sometimes intravenous contrast medium injected. Even more so with the positron emission tomography, PET. PET scan is also using intravenous medium, so that the blood saturated centers in the body can be detected very clearly, but the resolution of the PET scan is not very good. So what is the new method? Combining, because each of these scanning methods, including also electroencephalograph, each of these methods is good just for something and not so good for another things. So actually the new generations are now combining usually 2 different methods together in one machine. So that the new project, the Human Connectome project, has been started. And the ambitious aim is to map the neuronal connections in the brain. Before it was the Human Genome project, mapping of the DNA, which is more or less concluded. Of course the research continues, but the genome has been decoded, so to say. So now comes the brain. And we are getting these very impressive, beautiful pictures. Even visually it is quite interesting. But I think that these new beginning results in this research is bringing more questions than answers. The idea was in neuroscience that all this information, there is a kind of a convergence of the information in the brain, So there would be a kind of a center where the consciousness is created and the mind is created. Now, look at these pictures. The neuronal connections are rather running apart instead of coming together. So I think there are quite some new wrinkles on the forehead of the materialistic neuroscientists. A new challenge actually appears, because if we look in the old Abhidhamma, more than 2000 years old, in Buddhism actually there are not 5 senses, there are 6 senses. The 5 senses we know plus mind, and each of the senses has its base. So the seeing has the eye, the hearing has the ear or the drum, the nose, the tongue, the body for touching, tactile qualities, it's the whole surface of the body. And the organ for the mind is defined as heart. In Asia, you get it even today. When I think, pointing to the head, but the Asian people, I think, pointing to their hearts. So the influence of these ancient ideas is still among the people there. May be correct, may be wrong. The knowledge of anatomy 2000 years ago was certainly very basic. But these sages were actually approaching the mind and body from a completely different perspective to understand it. So they may be correct, they may be wrong. Don't believe, just think too quickly, even in the spirituality. What I say, that a healthy faith and a healthy skepticism belongs to the healthy life and belongs to the healthy spirituality as well. But the fanatic faith and the obsessive skepticism, this is the way down. This is the way to blindness and limited, to be limited. So this is my recommendation also for the neuroscience, to have its skeptics, but to also have open windows for a completely new way of understanding, especially if it promises to explain so many new things. So this can be said about the Human Connectome project, but actually more to this. The brain plasticity, very well known, that if some center is damaged, that the brain can very nicely compensate after a while. It will create new connections in the neuronal ways, functions. So I think even that each person is wired somehow differently. I suspect there is a big difference between the Asian brain and the Western brain, that there is a different cultural background. It's clear that I suspect that even the brain is wired differently. I spent 5 years in Burma, I know what I am talking about. And moreover, there are people walking among us almost without a brain. It is called hydrocephalus. It is this article I came across. On the right side, this is the brain of a normal average person. On the left side, this is the hydrocephalus, when there is a huge cavity filled with cerebrospinal fluid and a little bit of the brain tissue at the edges of the skull. And this is a person who has a job as a civil servant, father of 2 children. Actually, they found it by chance that he has this huge cavity in the head. And his IQ is under the average, that's true. 75, that's not very good. So the average would be 100 or 105, 110. And he has 75. But in a certain framework, he can lead a normal life. And how to explain these things? For me, it is just another indication that the mind, with its enormous complexity, is not created by brain. Look what the famous Professor Michio Kaku has to say to these new discoveries. He is the co-founder of the string theory, so theoretical physicist of a great caliber, I would say. Of course, in this particular clip, he is talking to university students, so also he was tuning his language to the level of the audience. Enjoy it.
First of all, is the brain a digital computer? For 50 years, we thought yes, and the answer is really no. The brain has no operating system. The brain has no programming. There's no CPU. There are no subroutines. Nothing. So what is the brain? The brain is a learning machine. It is a neural network of sorts which rewires itself after learning every task. Therefore, it does use some digital, some analog in a combination, but as you correctly pointed out, reading what these neurons do is beyond our capability. So what we do in the laboratory is we cheat. We simply see a configuration of neurons corresponding to moving your arm like this. Then we create a dictionary. Very clumsy, but that's what we do in the laboratory.
You see, so considering the complexity of the mind as well, I came across another article which was actually exploring the complexity of the body, of the human body. I could not believe it, so I started to calculate it myself. And in fact, I came to the double of that incredible message. So this article was describing the human body consisting of 37 trillions of cells. The number the assessment is now higher. I remember some 20 years ago it was something like 10 trillions. Now it is more, it is 37 trillions of cells. Each cell has a nucleus with chromosomes. Human cell has 23 chromosomes, or chromosome double or chromosome pairs. And the chromosome, actually, it's a DNA molecule coiled very tightly together. The 23 chromosomes are not the same. They are different in size, but the average size of DNA, if you straighten up the molecule, so the average size is 5 centimeters. If you would straighten the DNA of one human cell and connect it together, 230 centimeters, over 2 meters, which is a lot, because it is just a molecule. This double helix DNA is a molecule 3 nanometers thin, which means 20,000 times thinner than the human hair. This article was just playing with the idea that we would take the DNA of one human body, straighten it up and connect it. How long will it be, this fiber? From London to Paris? What do you think? From London to New York? Or 20 times around the earth? What do you think? All wrong, terribly wrong. Million times around the earth. One human body. Actually, according to my calculation, almost 2 million times around the equator. this enormous complexity of the human body. And we are sometimes so stupid referring to it, my body. What is mine in that? The digestion, or the blood circulation, or the immune system, the neuronal network? What is mine in the body? Now imagine if the mind would be more complex than the body. Possible, I don't know. So neuroscience is doing big step forwards. In my understanding, it is a big end step forwards on a journey many miles long. Now, I think with this preparation we are now ready to proceed to the next chapter in this exploration talk. Not yet near-death experiences, but out-of-body experiences. Let's look at that phenomenon a little bit more preciser, because that's kind of a between link. And we can understand the near-death experiences better when we understand out-of-body experiences. There are two kinds of them, but to start with that, I will take a kind of a reference base so that we have something solid what we can rely on. And I will take the very detailed description of out-of-body experience of psychologist Dr. Susan Blackmore. When she was young in Cambridge, she was exploring different areas of paranormal phenomena as generally, but as a psychologist keeping quite a sober view and mind over that, critical mind actually, perhaps even too critical, materialistically colored. They had some meeting and then they went to their private rooms, and she described that they were using cannabis. Yeah, this is the academic cover name for marijuana. They were stoned on marijuana, and in that state she got extremely strong out-of-body experience, starting with dissociating from the body, seeing her from above, then continuing through the ceiling above the Cambridge building. Then she would travel towards the Mediterranean, then back over Italy, Switzerland, then to New York and South America. Then she would expand to the size of the universe. Then again, getting so small, she could not fit back into her body. She was traveling inside her body, could not wake up in that. Fortunately, there have been friends around that helped her. Finally, she got kind of back to her normal senses. Now, in her report, two things are extremely valuable for our exploration of near-death experiences. When she was above the Cambridge building, she moved a little bit, because you know, in this out-of-body condition you can move to certain limits by your will, by your wanting. So she moved to the gutter of the building. Gutter is the rainwater channel on the roof. Looking at it in detail, and she could see that there are old metallic gutters there. And then she continued the astral traveling towards Mediterranean. So the next day she went out wanting to see if her vision from the out-of-body experience really is matching the human world reality. And looking at the gutters, there were new plastic ones. You see, the out-of-body experience completely mind-made. So that's the first very important message from that report. The second one, for her, it felt so extremely real. Getting the second message from this side, even if the things feel so extremely real, substantial, like this world around me, doesn't mean that it is real. And I take it as a very valuable information, because it is coming from a professional. And if you reflect deeply, you start to doubt even our world around us, because it appears so extremely real to us. But perhaps I will come to it a little bit later. There is a difference. So, I said there are two different kinds of out-of-body experiences. These, which are purely kind of a hallucination of the mind, but there is the other one, the other kind of out-of-body experiences. It is, which can be corroborated, veridical, they are called veridical, when you can verify that this out-of-body mind was witnessing something which was really taking place in another location. And we have the report of Dr. Chicoria. The first part of it, he was evidently out of his body, you know, seeing this phone dangling, looking at his feet, still there, but when he turned, he could see his body, people running to it. He could hear what they were saying, but they could not hear him. And he was seeing something which was taking place in the earthly reality. So if you want to become invisible, that would be the recipe. Now, of course, this is just the beginning of the out-of-body experience in the near-death experiences. Later on, if we go with the report of Dr. Chicoria, he was floating over the stairs, his feet or his legs were dissolving, went through the wall into the room where the children were painting faces. We don't have any confirmation if this was the earthly reality or this was already a part of out-of-body experience which is a pure projection. I don't have the information. It could be both. It could be that the children, his family really was there and the children were painting some faces. But it can be also that he was already detaching from the human world frequency, going into the spiritual one. The collection of verified out-of-body experiences is actually quite large and still growing. But it's true that these things are happening mostly among the close family members or relatives, so that the veridical weight of these testimonies is not very high. Therefore, very special position are receiving those cases which are happening in the hospitals, because the testimony is coming from professional personnel. To name at least the most famous ones, I would say Pam Reynolds. In 1991, she developed a dangerous aneurysm very deep down in the brain, almost sitting on the brainstem. Extremely difficult to get to it. Aneurysm, it's the ballooning of the blood vessel. If that bursts, that is fatal. The patient would die. So actually Pam was in a kind of a critical condition, and everybody giving up, because to get to that aneurysm without damaging the brain was very, very difficult task. Finally, Dr. Robert Spetzler took the case in Phoenix, in Arizona. But he chose a very special condition for this very special case. It is called the deep hypothermic cardiac arrest, which means that for the main part of the surgery, Pam was put into death. This kind of operation is called, or nicknamed, standstill operation. The procedure took 7 hours, starting with general anesthesia. The body was pumped with phenobarbital, a medicament to slow down the brain metabolism, to get rid of the brain waves. Then started the external cooling of the body to have more time for the main surgery. Also, the eyes were closed and taped shut to avoid the drying out of the eyes. Special beeping modules inserted into the ears of the body to have the possibility to monitor the response of the brain and brainstem. It was completely flat. In this condition, the body of Pam was wheeled into the operations theater. Now, the second round of the preparation started. Dr. Spetzler started to unpack the bone saw to open the skull. And the cardiologist, the female cardiologist, started to connect the heart-lung machine to cool the blood, to cool the body even internally. And at this time, Pam mind come out of the body, undocked from the brain, and typically observing these happenings in the operation theater from above, seeing her body. Actually, her face was also covered with the drape. Only the crown of the head was exposed for the surgery. And this is the condition from which her out-of-body experience comes. Instrumented completely, all the vital functions of the body was monitored, closely observed, and she is bringing testimony how the bone saw looks like. That what Dr. Spetzler was holding in his hand, this very unexpected tool, bone saw, we would imagine something like that. Not at all. It's a kind of a pneumatic drill, actually, with interchangeable blades. And Pam is comparing the instrument to the handle of her electric toothbrush. She is correctly describing also the case in which the interchangeable blades are disposed. She is even correctly remembering the conversation going on between Dr. Spetzler and the cardiologist, because there is a problem. The blood vessel in the groin are too small to connect the heart-lung machine, so doctor is instructing to try the other side. The out-of-body experience of Pam is happening in this very closely observed circumstances of the hospital, of the operation theater. Later on, the operation continues. The body temperature is brought down to 15 degrees centigrade. Of course, the heart stops by itself. The blood is drained from the brain so that Dr. Spetzler can use his surgical microscope to perform the operation. And at this time, Pam goes seamlessly into her very elaborate near-death experience. And coming back, after warming of the body, coming back to tell us the story. There was a very good BBC documentary about this case. It is still available somewhere in the internet. And in that documentary, Pam is giving her commentary. I was looking down at the body. I knew was my body, but I didn't care. My vantage point was sort of sitting on doctor's shoulder. I remember the instrument in his hand. It looked like a handle of my electric toothbrush. And Dr. Spetzler, later in the interview, he was reflecting the case. I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know how it's possible for it to happen, considering the physiological state she's in. At the same time, I have seen so many things that I can't explain, that I don't want to be so arrogant as to be able to say that there is no way can happen. This is a wonderful comment of a high-level specialist to express this kind of a humbleness towards the mystery of life. Very beautiful. So that was the Pam Reynolds case. The other case is also very special. Vicky Umipek Noratuk, a woman born blind. She got married but was involved in a very bad car crash. In that dying condition, brought to the emergency unit of a hospital, and classically hovering above the table, seeing the body on the table. The special feature of this particular case is that first time in her life she could see when she was dead. Observing these frantic activities of the doctors trying to do the resuscitation, first she did not know it is her body, but as you can move in this condition according to your will to some extent, she moved to the hand hanging from the table. She recognized her wedding ring, therefore she understood it must be her body on the table. But again, she did not stay very long and continued into a very spiritual kind of a heavenly near-death experience, which she in this BBC video commented like this. It is still very emotional thing when I talk about this, because there was a point in which I could bring forth any knowledge I wanted to have. And it was like this place where all the knowledge was. And then I was sent back. And then I went back into my body. And it was excruciatingly painful and very heavy. And I remember feeling very sick. Just few words from Vicky. And we can feel the genuineness, the authenticity of her deep spiritual experience. This is the reason why sometimes I put the near-death experience of such a intensity parallel or in juxtaposition with a real enlightenment of considerable intensity. They are different, it is not possible to compare it, but the effect on the life is similar. The life is changed. But now, coming to the final chapter of this long explorative talk, near-death experiences, what it is really. And I would say, I would like to stay sober throughout this exploration, not jumping too quickly on any bias or a spiritual belief, rather at first to collect all the information available and all the facts and trying to put it together so that hopefully at the end it starts to make a clear picture. To start with, everybody is complaining about the fuzziness of the term itself, near-death experiences. I would recommend 3 different distinct categories: dying experience, near-death experience, similar to near-death experience. And dying experience, really reserving it only for the cases when there was an evident cardiac arrest, there was no heartbeat, there was no blood circulation, and the report veridically, verifiably comes from the time when there was clinical death. So that would be the dying experience. Important information from neuroscience. Brain cannot function without fresh blood. 30 seconds after cardiac arrest, there aren't any measurable activities, neither in the brain nor in the brainstem. Real near-death experiences are extremely intensive, clear experiences. They are not happening in the dying brain. They even cannot happen in brain without fresh blood. They are happening in the undocked mind. One example for that, I would take the case of Stefan von Jankovits in Switzerland, 1964, a long time ago. A horrible car crash. In high speed, he flew through the windshield with his head. Everything broken, blood everywhere. When the doctor finally arrived, the heart already stopped beating. So the doctor was trying resuscitation, put some injection into his arm, not helping. So when he wanted to make the heart massage, he found out that the rib cage is broken, so he could not do that. He declared him dead. But also at that time arrived a second doctor. Perhaps he was living in the vicinity, perhaps he was one of the passengers. There was a row of cars already and bystanders everywhere. So he came rushing and talking shortly with the first doctor. He checked the Stefan, declared also clinically dead. So they were standing there discussing a little bit the case. And then the second doctor came to the idea that he has the adrenaline injection in his emergency case. So why not to try? So he administered an injection of adrenaline directly into the heart of the body. And the wonder happened that after a while the heart started to function, making pressure. So rapid transportation to the intensive unit of the first hospital. Now, probably this story is not quite unusual. What is unusual on this particular story? That Stefan was witnessing all that, hovering 3 meters over the scene. In this kind of out-of-body condition, sometimes it is called the fifth dimension. Sometimes people are reporting seeing everything from all sides at the same time. But actually what Stefan was reporting, that he could actually sense or feel thoughts of the bystanders as well. Not only what was spoken there, that he was hearing that, but even the thinking process of the bystanders. And he noticed one religious lady was praying actually, may all the sins of this dying person be forgiven. May he come to heaven. And Stefan was impressed by this wonderful act of compassion. And also he noticed the mental attitude of another guy, that he was rather critical and angry and sending negative thoughts towards that what he was witnessing. So that's the special case, that 2 doctors declared clinical death, and the report actually of Stefan comes from that time. It is not only veridical out-of-body experience, it's a dying experience. Some days later, the second doctor came to visit Stefan in the hospital. Stefan greeted him with a frown. What have you done to me? To call me back into this soaring body? And actually, Stefan wrote in his book that the dying was the best experience of his life. So a very specific case, very special. Pam Reynolds, not. I would call her not into this first category, into this second one, near-death experience. The characteristic of the second category, I would define as the life integrity is seriously endangered, and there is a story coming from that condition, but the heart is possibly working, the breath can be added by ventilator, certainly a critical condition, but there is a circulation of blood. This is the significant distance between the first category and the second one. So Pam Reynolds, because remembering that there was a discussion, what she actually reported, between the Dr. Spetzler and the assisting doctor to connect probably the heart-lung machine to pump the blood out of the system, to cool the blood. Possibly that at that stage the heart was still working. So out of consciousness, second category. But her out-of-body experience is 100% veridical. She witnessed something when the eyes were clearly taped, the auditory pathways were monitored by electroencephalograph on the brainstem, flat, so clear case. Also, the Dr. Chicoria, second category, he was electrocuted, but who knows, perhaps his heart was still beating, I don't know. So out of consciousness, second category. But the classical representation of second category would be Dr. Alexander, Ibn Alexander. The special case, or special feature of that case, that he is neurosurgeon, and he was with serious meningitis, encephalitis, I don't know exactly the difference, swelling of the brain, deadly, critical. So actually fully complying with the second category, but I think his heart was beating, he was in deep coma, 7 days. Big near-death experience, quite popular in books. To the second category certainly belongs also coming out of anesthesia, narcosis after operation, after the surgery. The life integrity can be quite seriously in question. So people sometimes reporting near-death experience. Into the second category, I would take also people falling from cliff. The life integrity is seriously endangered, I guess. So it fulfills the second category. But what they are reporting is rather the life review. The events of the life rapidly flashing in front of their mental eye. It's just one element of a classical near-death experience. But why I am mentioning that? Because the term near-death experiences was coined to this kind of experience in the end of 19th century. So it's really very old and needs revision, I guess. But all the other cases, I would put it into the third category, because this basically has nothing to do with a real near-death experience, keeping it nicely way apart. Seizures, usually it can be deadly, but usually not. Another case of the third category, extreme stress, life integrity not endangered, or extreme meditation. Well, perhaps the ego is dying, but life integrity, no. All the drug reports, ketamine, very special drug, actually used in medicine sometimes because it has an anesthetic effect. There is a kind of detachment even from the feeling of self. So today it is usually taken as a party drug. Sometimes like floating, kind of out of body, but forget it. This has nothing to do with a real near-death experience. The atmosphere is completely different and the effect. The same with the pilots. Fighter pilots, sometimes they are making sharp turns when they are on mission. So in the training they are prepared in a big centrifuge to be exposed to this surge of gravity. And they are actually going to 9G, 9 times the gravitational pull what we are experiencing on the surface of Earth. So they go 9 times over. So everything extremely heavy. Of course, even the blood, so the heart cannot pump it up to the brain. So the pilots come out of the centrifuge on the verge of fainting, reporting strange things. But again, I was reading some of this, far away from the atmosphere of near-death experiences. You know, if this would be near-death experience, I would qualify in that case as well. What happened to me in a long retreat in the mountain, sitting, there was a period of very well going, very easily going practice, sitting for very long time, 3-4 hours, feeling absolutely refreshed. So from one of these sittings, I stood up abruptly, instantly fainting. I collapsed. The same effect. The pressure of the heart was adjusted for the sitting position. When I stood up so rapidly, so suddenly, of course, the heart cannot change the pressure so quickly. I went down, I was unconscious for a while, which I don't remember. I remember coming back when the mind started to docking again with the brain, with the psyche, with the neurotic patterns of the mind. This heaviness, the limitations, from this free flowings of the free mind. So yes, the mind can dock and undock. Perhaps the fighter pilots can qualify as a partial undocking. That's okay, but don't put it into the category of near-death experiences. And all the drug experiences, actually, Dr. Rick Strassman made lots of experiments with DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Extremely strong and powerful psychedelic hallucinogenic drug, onset within seconds. And because it was for a scientific research, he took only professional volunteers with lots of experience with drugs to have really valuable reports from them. And perhaps 2 of them, of many, have reported vaguely similar to near-death experience. But the majority was rather reporting encounters with completely different life forms. That was the majority of these special trips. Completely different life entity interacting with them. That was the routine experience. I even thought that perhaps Rick Strassman, 2 of them has overdosed. No, just thinking, just joking. Similarly with the CO2, all this kind of cheap shots from the skeptics, from the mainstream science, materialists. Drowning will hold even on the hum of straw, muddying the water so that it is not clear. CO2, that it causes near-death experiences. CO2 in the bloodstream. people in serious condition, life condition, probably the breathing is not working well, so there is too much CO2 in the bloodstream, mixing the cause with the result. So that there's too much carbon dioxide in the bloodstream would be rather the result of the critical condition. So enough with all this. Now, getting into the serious reflections about near-death experiences. And again, I would like to take a kind of a solid foundation what we can rely on, or take quite some reference from that. And this time I would take the Tibetan Book of Death and Dying, Bardo Todo. Many things coming from that. It's an older literature. I read it some 35 years ago, but I think the major points I will remember correctly. First of all, Bardo means transition, the state of transition. So when the body dies, there is some time of a transition. Theravada Buddhism would like to put the last conscious moment, Chuti, followed by the Patisandhi, which is the rebirth consciousness of the next life, like an instant following. But I think more suitable to speak about this transition state in between, which the Bardo Todo is describing in such colorful images. So Bardo meaning transition, and the book is speaking about 3 stages within that. Bardo of dying, Bardo of Dharmata, and Bardo of rebirth. Indicating that there is a kind of a development in that quite a long between stage. So that would be the next message. And if you remember the Bardo Todo, actually from the beautiful white light of death, which the near-death experiencer are describing with undescribable beauty and nobility and sublimity, wisdom, unconditional love, all these superlatives. But then the Bardo Todo describes these stages. It goes down. In the Dharmata, the first encounter is with the beautiful deities, but then the wrathful, the fearful deities. And only then comes the Bardo of rebirth. The Buddhist teachings are quite clear that the rebirth as in the same level, like again as a human, is extremely rare. It's true that Bardo Todo declares there is a possibility to exit into next rebirth in any of these stages. And I think from the white light even to exit to the nirvana. Or some Tibetan teachings even take the white light to be nirvana or Rigpa. Not really in Theravada. Nirvana is not light, certainly not. But certainly a very high spiritual state, clearly. So there is a development going down. Message to all those near-death experiencer who want to die as soon as possible, again, to experience this beauty. Be careful, because experience is just the beginning of the between state. And who knows how it goes after. Take the case of Howard Storm, with his stomach ruptured, and he was dying of pain actually. Late night in the hospital, no surgeon. So getting out of his body, he was taken by beings into the long corridor, getting darker, and hell. Really experience hell. So the next message from Bardo Todo, appearing repeatedly in the text. It is just projection. It is just projection of your karma. So don't take it lightly, because it's serious, evidently, but it is just projection. Very important message, because that's also my understanding, that near-death experiences are projection of karma. Perhaps the last things which I would take from the Tibetans, explaining that after the body dies, there is a kind of an unconscious break. And they say average is 2-3 days, when the mind wakes up into this new condition in the bardo state, and everything is enhanced. The bliss is much stronger than anything on the earth. The horror is stronger than anything on the earth. The colors, the feelings, everything's more direct. So there is a gap, and this would explain why majority of people, even with the cardiac arrest, doesn't remember anything. Because they were still in the gap. They came back before the mind would wake up into the in-between state. It's true that occasionally we are having also report of an almost seamless exit from the body, real undocking into the out-of-body experience. Dr. Chicoria is one case. Mickey Robinson, another case. He was actually involved in a plane crash, dosed with kerosene, burning, in the hospital, dying of pain, actually, of the burns. And he said, like if you take a glove of the hand, he was in the spiritual world. Actually, I would turn it that the glove remained in the bed and the hand would go into the spiritual world. So occasionally there is almost no break, but I think majority there is a break. So these are the things from the Tibetan Book of Death. It's an old literature, 14th century. It seems that even in this area there is a kind of a development. The old religions usually speaks about kind of a judgment. And even some of the Asian or Arabic near-death experiences really have this kind of a atmosphere, like to be sentenced by a tribunal, or at least being handled quite bureaucratically. The Indian kind of a tradition speaks of a god Yama, the god of death, Yama, weighting the deeds, black stone for bad deed, white stone for good deeds, on a scale which will be more heavy. That will be the destiny. But if you take the Western near-death experiences, the majority, this extremely beautiful kind of, at least the beginning of this afterlife between state. So perhaps there is even some development in that. Actually, what is this judgment? These people would report as a life review. Again, it is a kind of a review of the events of the life. Very quickly, even Dr. Chicoria was reporting some. Stefan was reporting much more, about 2,000. His assessment, 2,000 rapidly flashing pictures of the life situations. I would understand it in the help of my analogy with the computer. This is the time when the docking station with the periphery is dying. The body with all the sensory organs and brain is dying. So all that what was stored in the brain, in the analogy that was the external hard disk, all unresolved stuff is a karmic potential. The potential cannot just disappear tracelessly. That's against the physics. So it is the essence of the life, unresolved life situations and deeds, that it is transferred as a kind of an essence into the storage of the notebook, which survives. Now it is a pure karmic potential from the past life, kind of a summary of the karma of the ending life. Speaking about the understanding of death and rebirth in Buddhism, Buddhism has actually the idea of endless rebirth in different spheres of existence. So what is actually giving? What is giving the direction of the next rebirth? Karma. Karma activated in the time of dying. So it is not necessarily the whole karmic package, which can be quite containing probably everything, through all this life, the previous lives, all that, unresolved karma, a lot of that. No, it is just the karma activated in the time of dying. And there are 4 cases. Garuka karma means very strong karmic force. So if you killed your parents or killed a saint, that's the Garuka karma, which will influence the quality of your life already on earth, but even more after. But Garuka karma can be also positive. So if you got enlightened, significant intensity of enlightenment, it will certainly influence the quality of your life already on the earth, but even more after. But this is not always the case. So then there are 2 others. Death proximate karma or habitual karma. And the order is not really given, because rather what is stronger. Death proximate, the mental state, the memory which came during dying, can very well influence the direction of the whole afterlife of the rebirth. Or habitual karma, that what was done repeatedly during the life, accumulated strength, so it can very well influence the rebirth, the direction of the rebirth. But then comes the 4th one, and that's the problem. Any karma, any unresolved karma can get activated. And that's the scary part of the whole thing. And that's what brought me to Buddhism, actually. The simile for that is given with the cows. When the countryman comes in the morning, open the fence. Which cow will get first? So if there is a strong bull, so that's the Garuka karma. But probably there isn't any. So then it is these 2. Either the cow which is the nearest to the gate, or the karma which habitually goes first. But if this is not exactly the case, then any of the cows, here we are. So this is the explanation in Buddhism. Now, talking about the different spheres of existence, or as I call it, the different frequencies of appearances, I have this diagram, using that very often. I think at least once I should give credit to the authors of that. Designed by Sunanda Lim, compiled by Venerable Acharya Suvano Mahatera. So it's a typical list of the worlds or of the planes of existence, meaning that all these frequencies of existence are inhabited by beings. These are worlds actually of beings. We are here, we are quite low, Still, there are 4 levels under the human ones, which is understood as the spheres of misery or great misery. And all that is actually above the human levels of devas or angels. This is the sphere of fine materiality, the gods, the brahmas, and the high devas, and the immaterial sphere, the arupaloka. So this is the understanding in Buddhism. These are all spheres of rebirth. The rebirth actually can go to any of these spheres, whatever, according to the activated karma. And here in this diagram, the spheres are actually painted one over the other. In my understanding, I would put quite some space in between for a quite good reason. I would compare these spheres of existence to the radio stations. You know, there are stations which you can tune in and quite a lot of space in between.
Vietato ai minori di 18 anni. Probabilità di vincita sul sito.
Protagonista della nostra rubrica parliamo dell'Ital.
What is the characteristic of the radio station? All those who are tuned to the same frequency are actually receiving the same kind of broadcasting. The same, like all humans are interpreting the world in a similar way. This is the table, this is the tree, everybody agrees this is a house, this is a lake, that's the sky, you know, this is red, this is brown. More or less everybody agrees with that. So that's because all are tuned to the same frequencies. So this would be like the radio station shared by many. But there is evidently also in between state, which is the bardo. Now, actually, all these spheres except this are spheres of nama rupa. Nama is mentality, rupa is materiality. So in Buddhism, we have 2 different types of phenomena. All phenomena are empty. Probably today it would be rather defined as a virtual realities, you know, spheres of virtual realities. But still, 2 types, mental and material phenomena. So Buddhism would teach that all these spheres of beings, all these worlds, are just empty phenomena rolling. But the phenomena, the existence and happening of these phenomena is real. Buddha would never deny that. The beings in this lower field are actually experiencing their worlds exactly as we do, with the solid objects all around them, kind of a heavy solid materiality all around them. In the blue fine material sphere, the materiality is much more subtle, only shapes, and the immaterial sphere. Now, why I would put some space in between, the state of bardo has not solid materiality. I would call it the mental materiality. It is a pure projection. There is not this kind of a solid materiality which would obey to the law of physics, mathematics, chemistry, electric, gravity, all that. You know, that's the difference, that the beings of the particular sphere are sharing a material phenomena which makes the whole sphere somehow more static. When it is only materiality made by mind, so it is much more fluent, changeable. Here on earth, when you wake up in the morning, you wake up to the same room you went to sleep the day before. In this Bardo between stage, everything is changing from minute to minute. So that would explain why the people in the near-death experiences, everybody is actually reporting something quite different, because the experience is completely individual. Certainly there may be some influence from beings from the other side, so to say, which are tuned to the same between frequency, possible. But generally that's an area of an individual projection. This is again quite a substantial central message from this talk. Better I will take it from the paper. When you examine the authentic near-death experiences in internet, beside many heavenly exalted luminous ones, you will find also deeply horrifying hell experiences. They are not so many, perhaps in relation 1 to 10 or 2 to 10, but my suspicion is that the hell experiences are underreported, quite understandably, because of the stigma these people may get from their environment. Even if people don't believe in the religion, there is still this background idea that only bad people experience hell, which is evidently not true. Examining these hell accounts carefully, beside a real disgust for the whole existence and rebirth in samsara, on top of that I got for a while a creepy feeling of apparent cosmic injustice. In Buddhism, if you know the law of karma correctly, you'll get the clear understanding or even assertion that there is a basic universal justice, but this justice, or perhaps we should say rather cosmic equilibrium, it works only when we consider extremely long periods of time. In a given cases, like within one lifetime, irregularities are quite possible. Buddhism is teaching conditionality, cause and effect, like for example karma-vipaka relationship, meaning things do not happen in our life just by chance or coincidence. There are many references in the scriptures supporting this kind of fundamental universal justice. Even for the direction of rebirth, the Buddha gave a clear general metaphor. If stones mixed with liquid butter are thrown into water, by nature the stones will go down and the butter will go up. That was his simile illustrating the basic function of karma during rebirth. But on another occasions, Buddha also clearly declared occasional irregularities. The samsara and karma are not a mechanical clockwork, not at all. If you study the different kinds of near-death experiences, quite possibly the difficult hellish reports may reveal the nature of near-death experiences more clearly than the exalted ones. It will become clear that the form of the near-death experiences is a mental fabrication, or better, mental karma fabrication, similar to our dreams. You can feel in these stories the typical dream language, the sudden changes of the place and scene, without any logic, the emotional charge in these stories, or another element of the dream language, substituting one thing by other thing, etc. Brian Melvin near-death experience is one of the most intensive, horrifying ones. After such a shock, no wonder that after being saved by Jesus in the end of his near-death experience, he became dedicated Christian evangelist. The same Mickey Robinson or Howard Storm. The hell near-death experience of Howard Storm brought even the thought to me that the experienced horror may be linked in some way to the extreme pain of his physical body. When the mind undocks, bodily pain instantly disappears, logically. But if later the mind comes closer to the ailing body and connects just a little bit, the intensive pain may give rise to the hell imaginary in the mind. But probably this explanation is not correct because it doesn't fit to all of the hell stories. You know, Howard Storm, actually, his stomach ruptured and he suffered extreme pain. He was dying of pain, actually. They could not find a surgeon. So he got a very extended near-death experience, the horror one. And again, in the end, he was as if saved by divine beings. Sartre's near-death experience became hellish ominous, but even more so when the police and a medic came or even broke into her room, and she, in a state of a serious bodily distress, woke up from her near-death experience into her body. Again, a kind of a dream language interpretation of the heavy situation. Police come in and she was actually getting this very ominous end of her near-death experience. But her experience was not that intensive as the other ones. I have great respect and I am sending great gratitude to all these people who came forward and shared their difficult stories. But also I fully understand all those who did not come forward. These highly colorful reports convicted me that the form of near-death experience story is a creation of the undocked mind. But on the other side, that the near-death experience phenomenon itself is a highly important, often coded, encounter with deeper layers of one's own being. In another spiritual systems, often referred to as higher self, or high self, or even as an encounter with God or Jesus. But if we consider that the higher echelons of consciousness are actually interconnected in the direction of oneness, everything becoming one, so even such an interpretation as encounter with God or Jesus cannot be actually considered as quite wrong. We should understand that a being, a person, has many psychological but even spiritual layers. In Buddhist language we can say many karma layers. I had somehow comparable encounter with deeper layer of myself, of my being, at the beginning of my meditation practice. Therefore I can give my personal thoughts to that. This very noble, very high instance felt extremely superior to the everyday little ego. It was not really any self at all, but it was something like very advanced instance in the very middle of my own being, or better, my beingness. Extremely powerful, in an advanced way, extremely fatherly, concerned fully with spiritual progress of the much lower ego. It was not more me. It was above that limitation. It was also clear that this instance is able to arrange anything in order to advance spiritual progress of the given individual. Far, far beyond ego's typical concerns, worries, fears, pain and happiness. Sometimes even a little bit like when you want to bring your ailing dog to the veterinary. But here we are coming to the central paradox of the near-death experience phenomena. From the worldly perspective, near-death experience belong to the category of dreams or mental projections. But as to their content, intensity and significance, they can be the most important, decisive and pivotal events in the existence of an individual. Perhaps when all this will become more clear, then psychology will start to develop kind of a scientific religion to prevent people to have hell experience when the body dies. Speaking about the middle of our own being, that was my first image of rebirth, and it is still the best I have actually. In death, beings are released from their bodies, leaving all behind, and they are coming to the center of their beingness, which they experience as the great white light of the death and dying. But because there is still unresolved karma, the karma will bring them down into some next existence. This was actually my image, that in dying, the stream of consciousness, the stream of mind, is coming into its own center, interpreted as the white light of the death. This enormous beauty and knowledge and loving kindness, all these superlatives. But because there is still unresolved karma, the mind will fall down into next existence, into next individual mind and body, having another lifetime, leaving that again, dying again, coming to the white light of the death again, but missing it again, falling into next rebirth, and again, another lifetime, sometimes missing the white light by far, falling into next existence, and again, until we learn and we don't need to come anymore. One of the most simple and most beautiful images of the aim of all great spiritual systems is the picture of the path towards the center. The spiritual paths are connecting us and bringing us to the center of our own being. Some Buddhist systems call it emptiness, you can call it fullness, it's the same. Coming home. We live in the outskirts, in the periphery of our true beingness, in a kind of exile and separation for a very long time. On the spiritual way, we are putting aside our attachments and mergings in the vortex of presence. The opening can happen in a click, but usually it is a long way, because we love our prison. So I think with that, I have actually explained majority of the near-death experience, disagreeing partially with everybody. Certainly I disagree with the materialistic understanding, not understanding of reality. The psychological kind of approach has much more to say. As I started, this similarity of the birth channel with birth of the baby, to compare it with the tunnel and coming to the white light. Oh no, this is just a coincidental kind of a similarity. Meeting the departed ones, there is absolutely no meaning in that. No, but the psychological explanation has at least this phenomena of projection. Psychology works a lot with projection. We are projecting our own material around us. That's very well known. And in the near-death experiences, really, this is something going on a lot. So certainly, psychology has a little bit more to say. But I have a little bit actually disagreement even with the spiritual community, which takes quite often the life just as a kind of a dream, hallucination, a thought. Actually, there was a movie, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, some 35 years ago. It has quite touched me somewhere. And if you have seen it, the novel was written by Richard Bach. Neil Diamond made the music. And departed Jonathan gets the teaching from Chang, I think was the wise seagull teaching him. And the conversation goes like this. The Chang is explaining, your whole body from wingtip to wingtip is nothing more than your thought itself in a form you can see. Break the chains of your thought and you break the chains of your body too. I don't agree with that. The thoughts are not made of cells, molecules and atoms. Spiritual community jumping on that kind of explanation. Everything is just a thought form. Not really, not everything. There are material phenomena as well. Abhidhamma is very clear about it. Nama, Rupa. Nama is everything conscious, the consciousness and the mental factors. But there are also Rupa phenomena, which are not conscious. And these are the earth, water, fire, air. In Abhidhamma understood as nothing material, please be careful, these are only characteristics out of which the mind creates the appearance of this material world around us. Not that there would be anything substantial, hard, heavy out there. That's our illusion. That's the world of appearances. According to this highest kind of insight, highest kind of truth or reality, these are only qualities. It is like things are painted with different colors in our mind. I would compare it, what we know, what is familiar to us, we know that all the colors of the world are just combination of three primary colors. We know that. If you look on a television with a magnifying glass, you will see just three primary colors, and everything what appears on a television is the admixture of three primary colors. So similarly, our mind works with these four elementary qualities, painting the appearance of the material world around us. That's Abhidhamma. Do you think that in this, the Buddhism and Abhidhamma went too far? Too far-fetched? Too fantastic to be true? Not at all. Science knows these things long time ago. I told you already in the beginning. Listen what said one of the greatest physicists of modern times, the central figure of quantum mechanics, Niels Bohr, almost a century ago. The common sense view of the world in terms of objects that really exist out there, independently of our observation, totally collapses in the face of the quantum factor, quantum mechanics. And Niels Bohr again, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. And I would say, if Buddhism hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Einstein was never happy with quantum theory, though he agreed that all its conclusions and axioms were scientifically perfectly correct. But still, this is his kind of defiance quote. I like to think the moon is there even if I am not looking at it. According to Abhidhamma, the moon is not there when you don't watch it, but the moon is not there even if you and many others are watching. According to Abhidhamma, there are only rupas, empty phenomena happening, that's all. That's the ultimate reality of the moon. But, on the other side, Einstein agreed and admitted, reality is merely an illusion, although a very persistent one. Good to know, he is here referring to our everyday sense of reality. But more important than Einstein's thoughts is here the quote from Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize scientist of the 20th century. The very study of the external world led to the scientific conclusion that the content of consciousness is the ultimate universal reality. Content of consciousness is the ultimate universal reality. And that's science. It sounds like a handshake between science and Buddhism indeed. Do you remember the quote in the beginning, Kalu Rinpoche? You live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is reality. You are that reality. Your consciousness is the reality. But you don't know it, you project it. When you understand this, you will see that you are nothing. There is not a real you. And being nothing, you are everything. Everything you can conceive is just the content of your consciousness. You are everything. And that's all. Actually, it is not all, because there is one more step to accomplish. To free oneself from all these appearances, illusions and hallucinations. And now we are coming to the end of this long talk. Do the pieces of the puzzle come together? Are they starting to give a clearer picture now? Can we perhaps even answer this strange, creepy question? Is the heaven and hell real? Well, what we can say with full certainty, considering this great number of near-death experiences authentic reports, what we can say with absolute certainty, that heaven and hell happens. To whom? To everybody? For how long? How real? How intensive? I leave it open. I leave it to you to connect the dots. According to your sources of information, your reflections, your beliefs. Actually, the Buddhism was never so much concerned about the degree of reality of all of these planes of existence. It was always somewhere around the teaching, but it was never really the central point. The real point of the teaching of Buddha's concern was always the connected feelings of happiness and sorrow, of bliss and horror. That these feelings and emotions are what they are. At this point, usually bringing an example of the bad ones, when we have a nightmare in the night, a really horror dream, waking up still full of fear, it was only a dream, trying to shake it off. Only a dream, really? So why is your pyjama sweat through if it was only a dream. You know, this is the scary part of it, that during dreaming this was your reality. So even if all these spheres actually are just a pure hallucination, pure projections, pure appearances, spheres of dreams and appearances, the happiness and sorrow is what it is. And certainly, even according to Buddhist teaching, to be reborn in some of these high divine places is a really very beautiful, noble and blissful state of existence. But the real aim of Buddha's teaching is nowhere here. Because Buddha was actually directing the people who follow to full awakening from all kinds of appearances and dreams and delusions and illusions. To mature the existence to the level of nibbanic peace, nirvana, the blissful, very, very sublime state of peace and freedom, liberation, so that we don't need to come again. I like this picture. It is a little bit like a symbolic portrait of samsara, the ever-turning, self-sustaining perpetuum mobile of all living and dying beings in the whole Omniverse. Is it beautiful? Is it horrifying? Unfortunately, it is both.